All right, good evening. I now call the Planning Commission and Board of Adjustment joint meeting to order. If you would please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Denise, can you call roll?
Certainly. Good evening, everyone. Chairman Ledoux,
Here.
Vice Chairman Willett,
Here.
Commissioner Clark,
Here.
Commissioner Clement, Commissioner Souther,
Here.
Commissioner Smith,
Here.
Commissioner Maleko,
Here.
and Councilmember Maloney said that he would be absent. And then I have, for Board of Adjustment, I have Commissioner Clark,
Here.
Board Member Bonagowski,
Here.
Board Member Willett,
Here.
Board Member Maleko,
Still here.
Board Member Tony,
Here.
and alternate Board Member Kratz.
Okay, I guess item 1 on the agenda, approval of minutes from the January 22, 2025 Planning Commission regular meeting. Is there any discussion on those minutes? Hearing none, if I could get a motion and a second.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to accept the meeting minutes for the January 22nd meeting.
We have a motion, is there a second?
Second.
Denise, we call roll? Vote,
Yeah,
I guess?
can you tell me who seconded that?
Kirk.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Commissioner Clark,
Aye.
Commissioner Souther,
Aye.
Chairman Ledoux,
Aye.
Vice Chair Willett,
Aye.
Commissioner Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Maleko.
Aye.
Thank you. There are no public hearings tonight. We do have 2 announcement and discussion items. I guess Rick Harmon from Economic Development is here. If we could get a staff report presentation.
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to. Patrick mentioned to me that you were interested in hearing an update on housing, our efforts toward housing. I suggested to him that since housing and economic development are so interrelated in a rather complicated way, that we talk about economic development as well, give a little bit of an economic development update. We're not going to talk about specific commercial development projects, but we'll talk a little bit about a couple of our larger planned developments. But there's quite the interesting relationship between housing and economic development. So thought we'd take a look at what it is, what we consider economic development. There tends to be a lot of different definitions out there. A lot of people have impressions of what economic development is. So kind of clarify what that is, why we need growth to some extent, and that ties directly into housing. And then what guides our economic development efforts, and we'll take a look at the complexities of attracting development, because that's closely tied as well. And then we can get into housing, some of the housing projects in the area, and then of course a Q&A if you're all interested. So what we consider economic development, there's a lot of different definitions out there, like I said. A lot of people think economic development is growth for the sake of growth. We don't see it that way. Economic development is just improving the quality of life, period, in Canyon City. There's a lot to that, but that includes a lot of social, economic, and sustainability questions that need to be answered and addressed for our community. So we consider it really right-sizing our community. What do we have the potential to be? What do we as a community need? How can we become self-sustaining as a community? We hear a lot that we don't want to be like this other community or that other community, but we do want to be the best Canyon City that we can be, and that's what we consider economic development. So everything we do is in that light and driven by certain factors in the community. Some of the critical benefits, the biggest one we have is we have a very old, dilapidated infrastructure system in our community. So we need to create a financial means to repair it, replace it, and grow it as we need to in this community. That's a huge driver of economic activity in this community, economic development in this community. And ideally, we do that without raising taxes. If you think about Project 2A, which is streets, we had to do that because we don't have the revenue generation from taxes to pay for that infrastructure after decades of stagnant growth at best. And the other thing we look at too is we like to receive grants. We like to go get grants because it helps supplement our tax dollars. However, we'd like to reduce the need for grants as much as we can because those grants often come with strings attached or they're for special projects and they sometimes impact the timing of when you're able to take care of problems. For example, if you have a series of road construction projects that you need to get done, but you can't get the granting you need to do it, you get granting for other projects, you shift from one to another because that's what you have available. So if we can grow our community, grow our economy, grow our revenue from our economy, then that gives us a lot more control over those projects and helps us grow as we need to. To have a say in what development is coming, what development in this community looks like. We talk a lot, City Council talks a lot about control. We're a home rule municipality. We like to control our own destiny if we can. Right now, we're not self-sustaining. We don't have the revenue to do that. So growth is really, in our case, much more of a need than it is a want. What guides our efforts? The first and foremost is our community. We have to take a look at what condition our streets are in. How can we better connect consumers to our downtown? How can we get people across US 50 safely downtown from the train, from Centennial Park? So all of these plans that you see here and all of the infrastructure work that's happening right now comes from those plans. What you can't see is the multimodal master plan on the bottom. All of these plans were done through stakeholder input, community input. That's what guides most of the decisions we have, other than those 2A projects, which are the roads. That's separately funded and specific to the road construction. But Centennial Park Master Plan, Arkansas River Corridor Master Plan, Main Street Strategic Plan, all of these, all that are tied now into the comprehensive plan, all guide our primarily infrastructure and place-making decisions. And we've been doing a lot that you can see is tied directly to those. We also look at our people. Who are they? What do they shop for? How do they shop? How do they market? How do they get their marketing? Where are they going to shop? And what types of products do we need here? This is obviously more specific to retail, and I'll get more into this chart in a little bit, at least that center chart in a little bit. But we don't know what growth we need if we don't know what our people need and want and how they can shop. So that's very key. Then also our community needs. This is kind of an interesting chart because this is referring to something called leakage. Everything, and you can't quite see it because the box is down there, but you see that 1.5 and 2 on the bottom. Yeah, right there, yeah. That middle section, that middle line, number 1, and this is from 2021. So this is out there a little bit away. So this has probably changed some. Everything on the left side of the number 1 is something we are shopping elsewhere for. So that's a direct representation of money leaving our community because people are shopping in other communities or online. We don't have enough of those in this community. And clothing accessories, people have been telling me since I moved here that we need clothing stores. So you can see that we're buying a lot of clothing elsewhere. We do pretty well on the miscellaneous store retailers. I honestly don't know what stores that category represents. And then food and beverage stores. We're doing okay on electronics and appliances. I would probably steer that more toward the appliance side. Anything on the right side is what we have in excess of our need for this community, and it's product that's being sold to people outside the area. It would be good for our community if we could have more on the right side and have more people coming to our community to shop. So are we providing the kind and quality of housing that's tied to this as well, that people want, need, and can afford? And that's what we're going to talk about in a little bit. So this is all very complicated to figure out. All of this is done through retail analytics. Your cell phones go with you wherever you go, and they're basically tracking what you're doing, where you're going. And then a lot of this data, we don't want to get into the weeds on this, but it's tied to who you are, what type of buyer you are, credit card spending, and so on and so forth. So it's pretty credible information. And then growth is necessary because we need to help our employees, and this is employers, excuse me, this is a big one, attract good employees. I moved here 9 years ago, and I began right away getting involved with the rec center initiative. All of the employers that were there were wanting a rec center because they couldn't find employees. Employees wanted amenities, and we didn't have the amenities they wanted. And that is still a key argument that people have in this community. John Paul Airy was talking about just this afternoon, said bringing in hundreds of people, flying them into this community, interviewing them, offering them jobs, and they turn them down because they can't find a house or they can't find the amenities they or their spouse or significant other needed. So these are two key drivers, I guess you could say, for our community, for our economic development growth, or efforts, and why we need to grow. Obviously, we want to help local businesses thrive. It's tough in this community when you've got 4 months of tourism. You've got to live through that longer shoulder season. So whatever we can do to help the local businesses thrive, we are going to do that. And then we also need to grow to create a quality of life that residents and visitors expect and want. That's closely tied to the employee issue as well. Then reduce reliance on tourism. As I mentioned before, it's tough to survive with just a tourism economy. And the bottom one is interesting because growth, in order for a community to create growth, it has to show that it has grown. Development begets development. We need to help attract the housing and commercial development that we need in this community. And that's where we'll get into the complexities between housing and commercial development. The challenge we have, and this is a large reason for why it's so difficult for us to create the growth that we need, whether it's development, commercial development, or housing development. Canyon City was a very significant commercial hub for a pretty significant, large region that went from Leadville to Fairplay to Cripple Creek to Victor, Westcliff. We had the railroad that came through town, which went up through the mountains, went up to all those mining communities. We had narrow gauge that went up to Cripple Creek and Victor. We were a significant commercial hub for bricks, lumber, agriculture, drugstores. We were that community where other people on the train came to get their goods. Once the interstate went in, once I-25 went in, that literally cut Canyon City off the Front Range. All of the efforts, the state put most of the efforts for commercial development along the I-25 and I-70 corridors, which really fed into Boulder, Denver, Colorado Springs, now Castle Rock. Pueblo is going to start benefiting from it some more. They're putting a lot of focus on Trinidad because it's a what's the word I'm looking for? It's a border community. A lot of the efforts were placed on that I-25 corridor. The challenge with us in this community now is that it made us put us in a position where we are too close and too far from development, from commercial activity at the same time. We're too close to the Front Range and we're too far from the Front Range. And this has been told to us many times by housing developers and commercial developers. On the retail side, retailers through analytics know that we are shopping in Colorado Springs and Pueblo. They know that 57% of our community works in Colorado Springs and Pueblo outside of the county. they know that if we're going there, we're going to shop there. So they tell us, if they're coming to us in Colorado Springs and Pueblo, why should we build in Canyon City? That's a significant hurdle. And then we're too far away because they can't necessarily rely on us drawing people from Colorado Springs or Pueblo to shop here, to house here. So we're in that very weird location geographically, that we are Front Range communities, but we're not close enough, or we're too close. It's a very strange thing. If we were farther away, if we were like where Salida is, or Montrose, or anything like that, there's more of a need in those communities. There's a perceived need in those communities for retail, for commercial, because they have to serve a broader area. We are being served by Colorado Springs and Pueblo. So that's one of the bigger problems we have with development. Lack of development-ready sites and vacant buildings. We are doing better on the development-ready sites. Retailers, especially in a community that doesn't necessarily show it pencils, that a project is feasible, they want to know that these sites are shovel-ready, and they want to know that they're ready, and there are buildings vacant. We do have retailers interested in the community, but they'd like to have 30,000 square foot buildings or 40,000 square foot buildings in place. We don't have those types of assets in our community. We had the Office Depot building. He couldn't fill that with anybody, and that was 20,000 square feet. He ended up selling that to John Paul. So we need those sites. We are getting better with that. We have the Loves pads out there right now, so we are starting to draw more interest. Fire station created a couple of pads out front. Those are starting to draw some interest. And there's some redevelopment opportunities as well that is starting to draw interest. So the interest is coming. We just need to make it happen. Another one is decades of lack of growth, lack of primary jobs and workforce make it appear that the community doesn't want to grow. This one struck me. A broker told me this in Vegas. You need to look like you want to grow as a community. And they look at the infrastructure. The next one is the aging infrastructure. These developers come to our community. They talk to people in the stores. They talk to people in the restaurants. They drive around our community. They look at US 50. And they kind of get a feeling before they even talk to anybody in this town what it's like. We have potentially a new retailer coming to town. They've been here several times without us even knowing it. And they look at the age of the infrastructure. They look at all of it, and they determine, does it look like a community that needs us, that wants us? That's something that we have to overcome. That's very difficult, and that's where a lot of these infrastructure projects we see right now happening. Those are really going to help us out. There's a fear and misunderstanding of what growth looks like in the community. When you have 60 years of lack of growth, you just really don't know what it can be. And then you look outside the community at growth in other communities like Salida and Boulder and Colorado Springs, and it's easy to say that economic development is going to cause that, and that's just not the case. So having an understanding of what it can look like is very important, and if you don't have that understanding, it creates pushback in the community. So a lot of that is education. That's partially why I get out and speak to people if I possibly can about why we need to grow. And then demographically, demographics don't readily show investors that projects will pencil. We have a very senior-oriented community, lower income community, lower, not significantly lower, but lower income, lower housing costs, lower rents. It doesn't look like if you have to spend millions of dollars on a development that they're going to pencil. So we kind of need to show that they will. So what do we need to do is kind of change the narrative. Canyon City is a 17,200, 300 member community, I guess you could call it. We are not a 17,000 person community. The 81212, 81215 zip codes, there's 32,000 people in our community that are served by this town. The narrative needs to be that we are a larger community than just 17,000. I've been in meetings with housing developers and they ask how many people are in this town, and we say 17,000. It's like, that's not enough. How many building permits do you issue? 30. That's not enough. You need the bigger picture. How many building permits do we issue in the county? It's more like 140. How many people do you have in the county? It's more like 32,000. And then in terms of the trade area, and this is the one I talked about before, this is a snapshot of where people are coming from to shop here on a regular basis. This is taking retail analytics, cell phone data from our largest stores in the community and kind of mapping out where the people are coming from, the majority of the people are coming from. Now there's businesses in town that draw from farther away. The golf course draws from Denver, Colorado Springs, definitely further away. Of all places, Pizza Madness draws a lot of people from the Front Range. People come here to climb and they'll come into Pizza Madness. There's a lot of people that come to Pizza Madness. But this is a snapshot of our trade area, our retail trade area, and this is what we share with retailers interested in the community and developers, commercial developers, and housing developers interested. We've got about 50,000 people in our trade area. So that changes the narrative of what our community looks like and whether it's going to be feasible to develop or not. So this is very key, and it's important to get out there. Unfortunately, sometimes this compared to this creates a lot of confusion. So we kind of have to be careful who we share this data with, because we don't want to just confuse. It's 50,000, 30,000, 17,000 people. I don't know what it is, but we target certain people, certain developers with this information, and our website has this information on it. So the challenge we have internally, whether it's us in our staff or Fremont Economic Development Corporation, is that community development doesn't exist anymore in communities. Community development was much more the softer services, the housing, the addressing the needs of people, not so much the economic factors of the community. With community development gone, economic development is the principal mechanism for all of that. So we are working on the child care initiative. We're working on other community needs. We're working on the housing. Housing is a huge priority for us. And then workforce development. Child care has become a big one recently, and where there's some initiatives right now to get employers involved with that. So it's not that we can spend our time just on business retention and expansion and business attraction, industry attraction, primary jobs. It's all of that, which really complicates things. Certainly complicates your day, because you can go down so many rabbit holes in a day. It's amazing. The biggest challenge we have with housing now, I mentioned before, development begets development. Developers want to see development happen before they develop. They want proof that it's viable. So we have this chicken and an egg scenario. Unfortunately, we need both commercial and housing development, and one typically has to come before the other, but each thinks the other has to come first. Housing developers want to see that there's commercial development, so people that are living in their units are going to have a place to shop. They're going to have things to do, especially multifamily rental units. They don't want to lose their tenants. And then commercial developers want to see rooftops and traffic counts. Housing wants to see traffic counts too. They want to see the rooftops, they want to see the traffic counts. So the challenge is, how do we do both at once? Where do we put our resources? How do we incentivize? That's where projects like 4 Mile Ranch come along, or the Abbey come along. So the fact that we have those two is a huge boon in our favor. And then we have a catalyst project in the Hotel St. Cloud that's drawing a lot of interest from developers and investors to come to our community. Plus, we go out and we promote. Rob Brown from FEDC and I were on a podcast today at Southern Colorado Business Journal. We were talking to Fox 21, interviewing, meeting with the station manager about what we as a community need, because they're going to be focusing on the Royal Gorge region here in a couple of weeks. So we get out and we tell these stories, and 4 Mile Ranch is a big part of that. The Abbey is a big part of that. Our downtown redevelopments projects are a big part of that. A lot of the historic work that's going into downtown. All of that is really to entice people to realize that this can work. Almost like if you build it, they will come, but it takes a certain kind of investor to take that leap. And that's who really we're working for. And honestly, we have those investors right now, so it's a good thing. So in a nutshell, and this comes from the report, I gave you all a report, the housing market analysis that we had done. Historically, the city's found it difficult to attract new housing development. When viewed through the narrow lens of historic data, and I'll get into that in a little bit, Canyon City and Fremont County did not exhibit the demographic growth levels or development activity that traditionally attract residential, and I added, and commercial and industrial developers. The proof is in the pudding. They want to see development happen before they're going to stick a lot of money into it. So those are the challenges we have on the economic development side, and that's the interesting relationship between housing and commercial. People say, why don't we get a Chick-fil-A? Why don't we have a housing development, put a housing development there? We're trying. It just doesn't happen that easily. So marketing our community, we've been told by a broker who manages property in this town, he doesn't live in this town, he manages property in this town. He tries to find retailers for property in this town. Canyon City is a maybe community. He said that's the best you're gonna do right now. It's a maybe community. So we need to change the narrative to make it a yes community. It means telling stories and getting proof of action and proof of success. We do that by showing community interest, incentivizing private investment where we can. The only real mechanism we have to do that is tax increment financing, and that's really only in the city boundaries. We can't do that so much on the county side with industrial or other commercial development out there. Create developable sites. Other communities are much more financially involved with creating infrastructure than we are. We tend to put it on developers to do that, and then we reimburse it through tax increment. It's a lot easier for those communities that are putting money into it, but a lot of those are generating tax increment, tax dollars to do that. We are not doing that directly. And then creating competitive advantage, that's the big one, because there is a lot of advantage here. We find it a lot better to get people here to see it, to see this community, than just to tell them, though. And that's a big part of it. So from a marketing perspective, if we had total control, if you've been to college, if you've been to marketing plans, you know the 4 Ps are product, price, place, and promotion. If we had total control of the message, that's all we would need. But since developers are coming here, asking questions of people, visiting stores, visiting restaurants, talking to chefs, they're involved with the marketing as well. So it becomes product, price, place, promotion, and then physical evidence. There needs to be physical evidence, and that's this Catalyst project, the hotel, that is starting to show that physical evidence. And then process, we need to make it as simple as we possibly can. If we make it difficult, there's a time value to money. There's a holding cost to projects that take a long time, and that will kill it before it even starts. And then the people, it's our job to promote this community, buy into development, and understand the need for it, the real reasoning for wanting it and needing it. So that's our job as a community, turn it from a maybe to a yes community. So let's talk about housing a little bit. I gave you the market demand, housing demand study there. First is to define the need. There was a housing study done in 2019, a housing needs assessment that was done in 2019, a very high-level economic analysis of housing. It didn't quite provide us the housing that we hoped for. Didn't provide much at all, really, in way of benefit, at least in terms of housing developments. It did help us, to some extent, create the plan area for the Abbey. There was a lot of discussion about that, utilize that plan for some of that, and we'll be able to see that plan in a little bit. But we know from employers, from the DOC, from the hospital, from realtors, that we have a lot of people coming to this community who want to be here, who haven't been able to find a house or haven't been able to find the amenities. So we know there's demand that's not turning up in the data. And I'll talk about the data a little bit. So we hired Pioneer Development Company that created that report. We challenged them to go find the latent demand. We know it's there. we'd like you to help quantify it. We need a housing needs assessment. Colorado Housing Finance Authority needs one. Division of Housing needs one. There needs to be one for them to participate in housing to help fund it. So we challenged Pioneer Development to come in and take a look at our demographics, talk to our employers, get a good feel for what this market looks like and where those people are and what that equates to, what kind of number that comes to in terms of housing demand. It was a little bit of a shocker. We didn't expect to see the numbers that you see up here, but that lower orange line where it says county annual housing demand, we could build 262 units in this county per year, for a while anyway, and fill them. Canyon City represents about 38% of those units, housing units in the county. That comes to about 99 units for us. This was kind of telling to me because the Division of Housing, there's this thing called Prop 123. Cities had to opt in or not opt into it, but if they opted in, they needed to agree to develop a certain number of affordable housing units per year for the next 3 years, according to what the the Division of Housing determined we needed for housing. And it's based on demographics, population, income. And they determined that we needed about 76 or so units per year of affordable housing. And we were shocked at that. It's like we issue 30 building permits a year. How are we supposed to build 70-some units? But this came up with 99 in Canyon City. The interesting thing is that this is an analysis. This is looking through the cracks of the demographic data and doing a real deep dive into migration trends. The city of Canyon City, if you look at the lower right chart, does not grow through natural increase. Natural increase is births minus deaths. Our population is shrinking that way. We are having more deaths than births. They're outnumbering. So our population and natural increase is shrinking. All of our growth, and this is good in terms of attracting housing, all of our growth comes from net migration into the community. That's going to be people leaving versus people coming in. And that's what the brown you see on that lower chart shows, and that net migration has been increasing over the last 7 years or so, 5 to 7 years or so. So that's a good indicator that we are growing and that we need to attract some housing. Another interesting stat that was revealed in the demographics is that the age group from 45 to 54, and you can almost throw 40 in there, that is the highest income producing age group. They have the highest income potential in this community, typically 2 income earners, typically with children spending money on their kids. They're leaving our community. We don't really know why. They could be because they want a promotion and they can't have it here. Could be because they want new housing and they can't find it here. Could be because they want amenities and we don't have them here. Could be because their kids left town, went to college, and they left. We don't know, but we can analyze where they're going. And we know that a lot of people drive into the community to work every day. We can analyze where they're coming from. The interesting thing that this study revealed is that those people that are leaving and also the people that are coming here every day are coming from areas that have a much higher cost of housing, a much higher cost of living than we do. You're talking Denver and Colorado Springs. Pueblo's closer to us in the cost. But Adams County, most of the people leaving here are leaving to higher cost of living areas, places that have higher cost of housing. So it makes sense. We consider ourselves needing affordable housing. Quite honestly, the consultant was a little concerned about this report because a lot of the topic of conversation in the government is affordable housing. But we actually have a need for housing, period. We always thought we did, but we have a need for housing, period. And he's saying that we could actually afford to build some $350,000 to $500,000 houses and they would fill up. Based on conversations with realtors, I agree with that. There's a lot of, the realtor that sells at 4 Mile Ranch, 75% of her clients are coming from Colorado Springs and they want property and they can't find it. So there is a need for that. We're also going to talk about affordable housing in a little bit. But this was kind of a shocking statistical anomaly, I guess you could call it, of the data that, yeah, we are a lower cost of living area, so we think that should attract people, but the people that are leaving here and people that are coming to work here every day live in a higher cost of living area. So how can we entice them, either the 45 to 54s to stay here, or those that are working outside the area to come here? And that's the basis for the 99 units or the 270 plus units. So the projects. Now, some of this is from 2022. I gave a presentation to City Council Planning Commission in 2022 that recaps some of the housing activity. Some of it is still current, but it'll give you an idea of where we were and where we are now and what's happened in the interim. The ones we were working on in progress at the time, 4 Mile Ranch at the time was to be determined. They were going through some ownership shifts, I guess you could say. They lost a controlling member of their group. They actually terminated a relationship with him. And they decided that they didn't know if they wanted to be developers any longer or if they just wanted to sell the property. And if they were going to sell it, they'd sell it to anybody. So we didn't know at the time where that was going to go. So that was at the time about 2,000 units. We have it up there to be determined. Field and Central, I'll get into that one. That's one that I recruited. That was going to be 200 units. Willow Creek, I'll show you that one as well. That was discussed back in 2022 for 224 units. The Abbey project is going through some changes right now, so that won't be the 852 units that it was projected for there. Keystone Ridge is moving forward. That's actually so far a success story. So at the time, we were looking at 1,344 or possibly 3,344, depending on 4 Mile. So let's take a look at some of these. The Field and Central project that I mentioned before, that is a project that I recruited. Housing has been a huge priority for us, always has been. I went to visit Fading West in Buena Vista. I toured their farm, which is that picture you see. That development's called The Farm. Invited them down to the community. We wined and dined. Well, we didn't wine them, but we dined them. And I showed them 6 potential locations for development, places that I vetted and went through with the owners and thought these would be good locations for Fading West. They were interested in building a second farm at the time. They purchased land at Field and Central, that yellow area down there, and they were going to build a 200-unit complex. It was going to be 120 apartments on the east side of it, which buffered more of a, not a mobile home park, but I think it is a mobile home park. And then single-family townhome type development on the west side of that. Would have been a great location for it. They came back to us a year later, wanted to meet with some stakeholders in town, and said they couldn't find data to support that their development would work. They couldn't find rents. They couldn't find information on rents. We don't have a lot of apartment buildings. They couldn't find information on the age of rentals because a lot of the rentals are homes. They couldn't also understand why our community had similar median family income as Buena Vista, but we couldn't sell a house for $600,000, and they could there. That ended this project. They didn't do it. They put the land up for sale, and it's still there on the market for sale. So that recruiting effort, which sounded very successful, very promising, ended up not being feasible because they couldn't find the data. Housing developers we have this weird data gap in our community. They just can't see that it will pencil. And the report you'll see in there is like a lot of the units that we have, the rental units that we have, are rent controlled. So they're held down at a lower level. It could be people that can afford higher rents, but their rents are held lower through different mechanisms, whether it's Section 8 rent assistance or some other system. So
Rick, I remember sitting in that conversation too, and with those stakeholders, and they were saying that they needed to have, it seemed like $1,800 a month minimum for
Yeah.
their rent. And I noticed in this report, they said that we need rents that target from $1,250 to $1,850. And I would even say that, because with my units, $1,250 is even kind of high
For our
apart-
community, it seems
For
high.
apartments,
Yeah.
I'd say that's even high. And even though the stakeholders like, if you build it, they will come, they will pay the 1,800, they're like, yeah, but our data's not showing
The
that.
data doesn't show
We
it.
will support $1,800
Correct.
for townhomes or apartments.
Correct. And that's the big question mark. And if there's a question mark, it's very expensive and it's not going to happen. So that's a big challenge with the Fading West one and others. You know, we need to overcome that. This is the Willow Creek project. This is in Florence. It's a really cool looking development. They were very eager to get this rolling at the time. And they went ahead with the platting. So the lower left, you can see a Fremont GIS map of the development. The challenge is, and that's as current of a map as the GIS will give us, you don't see a lot built out there. Call it location, call it whatever you will, call it interest rates, don't know. But this is a project that was very, this was really, they were eager to get this rolling. They had a lot of interest. And now it is not developing. I don't know the details behind it, but it's not developing as it could or should. That was going to be 224 units, 200,000 to 400,000. This was back in 2022. Now it's probably going to push closer to 3 to 5-ish, considering the cost of construction, interest rates, and so on. That's over by Sumo Golf Course. The Supermax is, see, 67 down there, and the lower Supermax is like up to the right. It's right across the highway. So you could argue it's not not an ideal location, but it's not a bad place. It's a nice looking development. This is one that has been out there for quite a while, the Scholastica property. On the north side of that right now, there's 3 houses there. They're trying to get COs, certificates of occupancy on those 3 houses. Developers running into problems with the city because the alley they put in there isn't quite built to the city standards, so they're working through those details. Unbridled owns the middle section. Unbridled Holdings owns the Cabrini building and the chapel. Unbridled Acts, which is their nonprofit, owns and tore down the classroom building in the back. And then I was working with Unbridled because they were interested in acquiring the apartment building to build workforce housing and affordable housing. So they were working on their financial stack. I was working with Division of Housing with Unbridled, Colorado Housing and Finance Authority with Unbridled. We had a financial stack just about done. So right in the 12th hour, I was literally in a meeting with Stan Bullis of Unbridled and Ryan Stevens, and I got a call from the Division of Housing saying the $1.6 or $1.7 million they dedicated to it was no longer available. Killed the deal right there. They tried to find additional funding after that, but couldn't. So we were very close to 42 units of apartments in there. It would have been beautiful. And they had other plans to build out the rest of the Scholastic as well. That definitely put a damper in it, and now they've had to put so much money into the hotel that he needs money, and he's considering selling the chapel and the Cabrini building. So that's in flux. A lot of the apartment buildings are still in the ownership of Phil Lund and his team. Unbridled and Unbridled Act still owns the center sections, but they are looking to potentially offload those to capitalize the hotel and other future projects. So another almost success story that is still in our thinking low-hanging fruit. This one is Keystone Ridge. This is north of town, closer to the Harrison School. This one, they are currently in phase 2, and they want to start building out phase 3A, which would be, I believe, the left section of the green piece. So that one's moving forward. You can see the GIS map on the left there as well. So that's so far a success story. We don't see it not completing. They're working through some surety bonding and financial considerations for the city to continue building out the phase 3. But that's 68 units of single-family homes. Abby, this was the project that I mentioned before. This conceptual design here was partially created using the economic needs assessment, the housing needs assessment, and then funded through a technical assistance grant through the EPA to do that conceptual design. The previous owners decided not to. They had the plan approved. They decided not to acquire the property. They put it back, left it with the owner. The Airy company, Airy family, acquired it, and they are now going through some changes to it to come up with a concept of what they think is appropriate for the community. So ultimately, it'll be good. The right owners own it. We'll put it that way. They are very interested in doing what's needed for this community, and they've been here a very, very long time. Very eager to get this rolling, and they're starting to clean it up right now. So they'll be putting a lot of effort into the roof of the monastery and other historic buildings as well. 4 Mile Ranch, I'll skim through this one pretty quickly here, but we're taking a lot of time. 4 Mile Ranch was a zombie development for the last 30 years, 20 years in particular. It's under new ownership now. They've tweaked the densities of the plan to bring some of the density down closer to 123 to minimize the cost of infrastructure build uphill. There's some water considerations there too that need to be taken into consideration, but they're looking at potentially 1,800 to 2,000 homes. And then they're also expanding the commercial opportunities there as well, adding more commercial in the interior of the development to get a clubhouse, to get more commercial activity in there as well. So they're very eager. Their investors love this property. Their investment team is about 7 or 8 investors. A number of them want to do their own projects as well. So they're going through a planning process right now, approval process. They've gone before Planning Commission. Now they need to go before City Council with their amended plan. And that will be next month. And then we do have affordable housing. This is a project that came to us, Belmont Development, in 2024. They applied in late 2023, I believe it was, for 9% in low-income housing tax credits for 42 units. They failed in 2024. The CHAFA didn't award them funding. So about 3 weeks ago, they reapplied for funding, and they would be going in the fire station lot on the corner of Independence Drive and Justice Center, right next to the Council of Governments, right next to other supportive services for low income. So this is promising. I'd like to think that since CHAFA didn't award them the 9% tax credits last year, that they will this year, but we don't know yet. But that would be 42 units of affordable units. And as far as other conversations, I mean, the cities, we've entertained probably 8 to 10 developers, housing developers. FEDC has probably entertained 8 to 10 housing developers. 4 Mile Ranch has entertained 5 serious housing developers, 5 commercial housing developers. The school district is building their own housing. Common Spirit, they provide housing for their doctors and nurses, and they're always looking for people. CHAFA and Division of Housing are also trying to help us get the housing that we need. So there's a lot of effort going into it. And right now we're putting a lot of attention and time into 4 Mile Ranch and the Abbey, and hopefully we can get Scholastica back on track as well. So happy to take any questions. It doesn't leave a lot of time for Austin, but from what I understand, he doesn't have a lot to talk about. So maybe that'll be okay.
Any other questions?
Rick, I know you can't answer this specifically, but with the current environments at the federal and state levels, as far as money, there's going to probably be a lot less money coming for different programs. How is that going to impact any of our housing efforts?
I don't. The Division of Housing is being more careful about where the money goes. I haven't been told by them that it's not coming because it's state money. But they're being more cautious about it. They're going to have a much longer application process. They want to know about things a lot sooner. So what happened to us the last time doesn't happen again. So in that respect, I don't know that there's going to be a lot. Interest rates are bond market right now is probably what's going to impact 4 Mile Ranch and possibly the Abbey more than anything, because they probably need to issue Metro District bonds. And the bond market is not an easy market at the moment. not because of the cutbacks at the federal government, but simply because of the economy. So that will be there. We will see potential impact on CDOT funding for like Clock Tower. May have to push back that project because of cuts, or at least perceived cuts. But it's still all yet to be determined.
But for a lot of the affordable housing, I think you have the federal tax credits that,
Yeah, I
That
haven't
could be-
heard. I haven't heard how those are going to be impacted.
well, I would,
Yeah,
the way things look, I would anticipate they're going to be less.
I would think so. Yeah.
So what do you consider Canyon City's comparative advantage to be?
Quality of life, really. You know, one of the things that we promote for the most part is that, you know, a lot of the growth that's happening in the Front Range. I mean, Colorado Springs right now has too many apartments. The builders think they're overbuilt, which probably won't help us a whole lot. But there's so much activity, there's so much congestion, there's so much activity there, there's stress levels are high. Recently we had the Denver Metro Mayor's Caucus down here. They had meetings at the Emergent Campus. They're all for the most part, they're from the Denver metro area. And they came downtown and said, wow, you guys have an amazing town. You know, we all strive for this. So having that environment downtown, having the pace of life that really strikes people when they come here. I mean, you just walk into this town and you really get a sense that this is not Colorado Springs, this is not Denver. That's what we have as our biggest advantage. Well, some of our disadvantages is we just don't have the amenities and the proof that developments will work. But right now, developments are managed by developers and they manage the purse strings. So we need to prove through the Hotel St. Cloud, through 4 Mile, that we can pull this off.
Would you consider any of the housing that's proposed to be built would it be for workforce?
Yes, yeah, 4 Mile Ranch in particular has worked with the city to, they've got some properties that they've even offered to dedicate over to the city or the Council of Governments. They've had meetings with the Council of Governments as well for workforce. Unbridled is still interested in creating workforce housing. There was a cybersecurity company that was interested in coming here that wanted to build workforce housing. So there's definitely opportunity for it. And honestly, I think it'll probably be the lowest hanging fruit because there's more funding available for that. And we can actually put in, Division of Local Governments with the state can help fund projects for affordable housing, can help fund infrastructure for affordable housing. But if they do it, all of the housing in that area has to be affordable, which complicates things a little bit. But yeah, there's plenty of talk about attainable and workforce.
Now, is the school district, are they the ones, do the students help build one house? Is that what the program is, or?
They do. They have that program, but no, they're working with Dreamwood Homes in Penrose. They're what's the old Harrison School? Is that what that school is? I can never remember the name of it. There's a field available there, and they're building some homes in there for teachers. Temporary housing, workforce housing for teachers. They go in there for a year until they find a home. So they're actively doing it. The hospital, I think last year sold a couple of units actually, but they're eager to grow. So there's definitely need. The DOC wants, everybody wants it. Everybody wants housing. We just have to create it somehow.
Well, I see that Chaffey County a few years ago has put together a housing development at the county level that they've done a lot of development with.
Yeah, and it's interesting on the state level too. One of the reasons we lost Fading West is because they started to work with private developers who were being funded in the rural resort communities. Rural resort became its own designation, which made it more difficult for rural to get funding because there was such a huge income disparity or affordability disparity in the rural resort communities. So a number of the Fading West units went to like Breckenridge and other, up in the Summit area, working with private developers. So their business model changed entirely, so they didn't have to be the developers anymore. But some of that certainly affected, the state level certainly affected anything that we could possibly ask for, unfortunately.
Rick, if the Hotel St. Cloud is supposed to be our beacon of success to other potential developers, how are they doing, especially in light of their attempting to liquidate their other assets to make up for losses?
They're managing. A very good thing is their tax credits, historic tax credits came in for the first 2 phases, and that's a couple $1 million. It got pretty stressful there for a while because the lenders wanted to see it. They wanted to see these tax credits, and they knew they were coming. But that is really contingent on their certificate of occupancy and when they can open. So if they open late, it pushes out the tax credits. They're moving forward. He's still looking for funding. He's going to finish the hotel. There's no doubt about that. It's just whether he will work on the Scholastica portion of it, because the Cabrini building was going to be the executive suites. He may not do that. But the hotel is moving forward. They're trying to open as quickly as they possibly can.
What's their deadline?
Well, they want to have a soft opening at Blossom. I've already booked my room, so they're booking for. They've invitation only at the moment for their coin club members, but they want to have a soft opening on Blossom, and they are working very hard at that. But that's their target. They don't know if they'll have all the floors open. They may try to go for opening 2 floors first and get the 4th floor finished afterward. Not sure if that's a complicating factor there. So, but as far as it's obviously not showing that there's housing being built, but it's showing that there's development happening here, which all of the investors for 4 Mile Ranch are watching the Hotel St. Cloud. I attend urban renewal meetings every month, and all those urban renewal authorities are watching the Hotel St. Cloud. We're going to have an urban renewal meeting here actually in May, a small development summit here with a bunch of other community urban renewal authorities. So there's a lot pushing the opening as well. We want to get this place utilized and get some events going in there. Just not so easy.
Do you have any insights on what John Paul Aries' intentions are for these properties he's bought in town, like the Office Depot?
Yeah, he's working on a lease for the Office Depot building. I can't really share who that is right now, but it's a vital community service, I'll put it that way. The previous owner of the building was not successful at all finding a tenant for it, and John Paul bought it, and it just worked out that he found a tenant to take the entire building. So, and that'll be a great location for the service that's going to go in there, potentially go in there anyway. The Abbey, he doesn't see that much density of housing being good for the community or the Abbey. So now he's trying to figure out what is. He loves the campus concept, but how can he expand, develop, produce revenue, and keep it that kind of a campus concept. So he's going through lots of ideas. I connected him with a consultant to talk about public-private partnerships and bonding and all that kind of stuff. So he's got a number of other acquisitions too that I'm not certain, but the Abbey is yet to be determined. It just won't be that density.
What about the event center and the Abbey itself?
He wants to open that ASAP. They're negotiating right now with vendors to operate it, and that sounds like they may have somebody lined up. So that'll be good. He wants to generate some revenue as quickly as he can.
How many acres does the city have? We've been talking about, I'd say, city property, like acres outside.
As in property the city owns, or within the boundaries? Property city owns? Not much at all. The city has 1 acre at Constantino's. It's trying to acquire another parking lot, and Skyline Steel site, which is just a few acres. That's part of our challenge, is we compete with other communities or urban renewal authorities that buy property and offer it to developers. And we don't have that history here. And the city pretty well understands that they're not in the business of buying property and competing with real estate and other investors. So as far as developable sites, not much at all.
Is that 3,000 acres up by the bridge, that city property, right?
That is, I don't remember the actual acreage. 300 acres is the Royal Gorge Bridge. There is 5,000 acres, I think, up there that the city owns, and the mountain parks, Red Canyon Park is 640 acres or something like that. And then Temple Canyon is about the same size, 600 plus acres.
Water's the big problem, but for developing for
Yeah.
housing is getting water there,
Yep.
which Ty Cipher has been beating his head against the wall, trying to make that happen.
So the city has those water rights from the river, right?
City has water rights from the river. It's complicated, but the cost of getting infrastructure up there is exorbitant. And if you're going to build infrastructure, you want to build out development to pay for the infrastructure. And the interest, when you think about commercial development and what they want, there's land out there that's for sale, commercial land that's for sale out there. They're not getting any interest because there's just no traffic. There's not synergy. Retail-wise anyway, there's not synergy. Developers want to be by other development. So really the east side of Canyon is where a lot of those, and along the US 50 corridor is where the developers are looking.
And the developers are looking there too because of how quickly they can get to an airport
Yeah,
from the location, because it is close, just close enough to Colorado Springs.
just close enough, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So there's developers out there that have that vision. It's just making it work.
I think for water at the Royal Gorge Bridge, they were saying that the most feasible would actually be piping water in from the river at location there and having a plant for water distribution there. I mean, so we're talking big, big, big money to make that
Yeah.
happen.
Mhm. Yeah, it's very, very complicated. We do have a lot of water, though, and that's good for development. It's good for developers to hear that, because like Pueblo West doesn't, Fountain doesn't, there's communities that just don't have a lot of water. We just need to capitalize on it somehow, and it's an interesting, it's a really, it's a fascinating position, it really is.
Glenwood Springs, they have I'm doing a workforce analysis for Glenwood Springs for a project for school. And they are doing they just upgraded their housing analysis too. But their community, they have tons of land. Their community actually passed a referendum on their own, and it passed by over 75% that the city cannot purchase any land or sell any land without going to the vote of the people first, because they did not want to see housing units coming in
Oh.
to Glenwood Springs. And if you're going to build any units, 4 or more units, you'd have to go through planning and zoning and city council for approval. I mean, they put all kinds of roadblocks in the way that are preventing housing, and they also require fire sprinklers in residential and ADUs even. And so we look at some of our problems, but I mean, we're like, hey, we've got land,
Yeah.
we've got incentives, we've got all this, and yet we're still really struggling to show them that we
Yeah, it's,
are moving up on the
Yeah,
tick. It seems
it's-
like, yeah.
like I said, it's fascinating. It's a fascinating dilemma. We keep hearing that Canyon City's next, and we've been hearing that for a long time. Canyon City's next. Like, well, let's try to some extent, let's try to control what that looks like, but come and check us out at the same time, come to our community, but not too much, grow, but not too much, you know, to give us what we need, that's about it. But
Do you feel like some of these failed attempts at development are not boding well for potential to finally get over that edge and start getting that development and upgrade that we need? Or do you think we're still on the edge?
I think we're still on the edge. I think there's momentum, there's more momentum now, but I think we're still on the edge. It's just too tenuous of a market, of an economy right now. Interest rates need to help a little bit, a lot, actually, because when the interest rates went up, everything just kind of, all the
Everything died.
conversations dried up.
Yeah, that's true.
So the economy needs to help us. But it also doesn't help that we just haven't been able to develop. And I hate talking like that because it sounds negative, but it's the truth. We just haven't been able to develop. And it's so hard to know why, you know, because we're only, you know, if you live in Colorado Springs, you work in Denver, you're driving through more traffic and you're driving just as long as if you were living here and going to Colorado Springs. You know, and you could spend just as much time going from here to the airport in Denver as you could from Colorado Springs to the airport in Denver because of traffic. So it's really interesting that we just fall off this. It's like we fell off of I-25, you know? It's just really a weird economic location for us. But, you know, there's organizations, the Southern Colorado Business Forum and Digest, the podcast we were in this morning, he loves this area. He was working at the hospital here, the guy that, Dirk Hobbs, who runs that organization, he's trying to promote this area. He's trying to promote all of Southern Colorado. There is a lot more push right now to promote the entire Southern Colorado area. You know, we had Southern Colorado Startup Week a few years ago, and 2 years ago that was a cooperative between Colorado Springs, us, and Pueblo. You know, Emerging Campus is here and in Trinidad now. So there's a lot of efforts to make people realize that these communities like us in Florence and Penrose, we're not so far off the Front Range. We are within drivable distance. You know, so I think it's turning. And a lot of the developers that are working in our community right now are helping it turn. So we have really good developers in this town right now, really good developers. And Austin's probably getting ready for bed.
Any other follow-up questions for Rick? Hearing none, Austin, it is your turn.
Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah,
Thank you all.
Rick.
Hope it helps.
Well, this certainly won't be as interesting of a presentation, but I can promise you it will be shorter. So just real quickly, Patrick wanted me to go over sort of the differences between quasi-judicial, legislative, and administrative actions for an appointed or elected official. So those are really the three buckets that I see your duties falling into as an appointed or elected official. And they all have different legal requirements and considerations with each. So starting with quasi-judicial, which has the highest legal requirements. A quasi-judicial act is one where you're making a discrete decision on a particular application. So think about approving a variance or site plan. Something related to a particular property owner where you're applying the criteria in the code to the application materials in front of you. So that's going to be the highest legal threshold, and for good reason, because in that situation, you are acting as a judge. And so due process is triggered. That's why we have notice, hearing, and neutral decision maker kind of constraints on those types of decisions. So really the goal in those types of proceeding is to apply the criteria to the evidence presented at the public hearing. And so we talk about applying the record to the criteria in the code. When we talk about record, we're really talking about three things. We're talking about the packet that is posted for that meeting. We're talking about the testimonials that are given during the public meeting, which will include staff's presentations and testimony from the public. And then the third is the adopted plans and codes of the town. And so most of the time your staff or all of the time, your staff will highlight for you what of those plans and adopted codes are going to be most relevant to that application. So your job as the appointed official in those types of applications is to apply the criteria in the code to that record. So you must be fair and impartial, not engage in ex parte communications. Ex parte communications are communications outside of that public setting, outside of the public meeting where you're talking about the merits of the application with the applicant. So try to avoid those types of communications and try to avoid bias. And when I think about quasi-judicial proceedings, I like to use the following example. When you think about all of these considerations and why they're important, if you're walking into court for a proceeding that you're involved in, and you see that the judge in your proceeding is talking to the opposing party, and you overhear the judge say, "Don't even worry about it. I am going to do what it takes to make sure that you get the win in this proceeding." That's not going to give you great confidence that the proceeding is going to be fair and that you're going to be judged based off the merits of what you're bringing forward, based off the merits of your application. So that's why those quasi-judicial considerations carry the largest or the highest legal bar of those three types of duties that involve appointed officials. And so the next is a legislative, or the next type of duty is legislative duties. And legislative duties are when you're creating generally applicable policy decisions. So like creating zoning regulations or recommending a comp plan amendment, something like that. So in those cases, you're not applying specific criteria to an application, you're making broad policy decisions. And so you have a lot more discretion. You don't have the same types of legal constraints that you would with a quasi-judicial action. And really what you want to avoid in legislative actions is just avoid fraud. Don't be fraudulent in creating that legislation. Then the third bucket is what I would call the administrative bucket. And that's just that when you are an appointed or elected official of the city, that's the hat that you can never really take off. You can never take off the fact that you are always sort of representing the city. So just keeping in mind that you can't take that hat off and that folks might reach out to you to say like, "Hey, I've got an application coming up and I'd really appreciate your vote." And so in those types of conversations, it's going to be important for you to still protect the integrity of that future proceeding, especially when it has to do with a quasi-judicial proceeding. So that's the end of my spiel. Happy to take any questions or comments related to anything I discussed or any other legal questions you might have regarding your duties as an appointed official.
Austin, do you see any quasi-judicial proceedings in our near future?
What's that?
Do you foresee any quasi-judicial proceedings in our near future?
Potentially, with the 4 Mile application. That's the first one that comes to mind, but that's going to be a better question for Patrick.
Any other questions? Okay. All right. Thank you, Austin.
Yeah, of course.
And any other, I guess, let's see. Next Planning Commission meeting is scheduled for March 26th. Any other announcements? Hearing none, we are adjourned.